Welcome to the Identifying Fake Regulars, Ad Regulars, and Witch Regulars seminar. I'm Chris Jordan, your presenter for today's seminar. There's been a lot of interest recently in the fake regulars, and I'm going to show you today how to identify a fake from this batch of reproduction or replica regulars. All of this information was compiled by me in collaboration with others: Gary Beck, John Laspina, David Welch, and Sean Peterson, just to name a few. I put together the documentation and photos to help collectors recognize the fakes. This is a picture from the batch of fake regulars that were first sold to John Laspina by Curtilina, then later given to a John Tabor, who sold them to many different dealers, and they're out and about in collections today. Some people know they're fakes, some people don't. Curtilina was the executive vice president of PEZ Candy in the USA from 1953 to 1979. Ad regulars were hot stamped in the office at PEZ Candy in a simple process that took just a few seconds, according to Alina in Welch's Collecting PEZ book. The first appearance of the ad regulars from Curtilina was sometime in 1997 or 1998 when he sold a large group of these to John Laspina. John Laspina paid a hefty sum for these dispensers and began selling them. Shortly after he started selling them, he realized by observation and then did some chemical testing of the paint and concluded that these were actually fake. He returned everyone's money, got the dispensers back, and returned them all to Curtilina, who then later passed them on to a man named John Tabor in around 2008. This is a second picture showing you more of the ad regulars that were in this batch. In April of 2013, I was contacted by email by John Tabor. He wrote, "Greetings. About 5 years ago, while visiting with a good friend and former business partner, Curtilina, Executive Vice President of PEZ USA for almost 30 years, now departed, Kurt gave me a banker box filled with some vintage PEZ dispensers in plastic bags and said I should sell them. At that time, I was preoccupied with other things and didn't give the dispensers much thought until today, when I pulled them out of the box and took the attached photos. The dispensers are grouped by color and branding. A small piece of paper tells you how many of each type there are. I'm an entrepreneur, not a collector. And now is the time for me to sell them for the best offer. I'm contacting a number of people who might be interested in purchasing these dispensers. If you or one of your associates are interested in these items, please reply to this email with your telephone number, and I will arrange a time to chat with you about it. I would like to sell all of the dispensers by April 20th. I'm in Sacramento, California. Thanks. Cheers, John Tabor." So the first two photos you saw and these additional photos are from the group of pictures that he sent in that email. You can see the pieces of paper indicating how many of each item there are. This is more of them. That's an awful lot of ad regulars. My first thought when I saw this was, well, after I picked my chin up off of the table and wiped up the drool, wow, how did these all come about? And then something in the back of my mind reminded me of John Laspina's fake regular story. So I started investigating. Altogether, John Tabor had 364 dispensers, plus parts and pieces. He had extra candy buttons and some loose stems, loose caps, in addition to the 364 complete. John Laspina had also gotten the email, and John Laspina let him know that they were reproductions or replicas, which is a nice way of saying fake, that he had chemically tested them, and that from that chemical testing, he discovered they were actually printed in the 1990s. I continued emailing with John Tabor, trying to get more information, and after John had contacted him, he wrote to me that it would be unfair and illegal to offer them as new when I can't vouch for their origins. I offered to have some samples chemically tested. I would have the plastic tested in the labs at the university where I worked at the time. But then John stopped emailing me. Despite saying that it would be unfair and illegal to offer them, he did in fact sell the dispensers to several different dealers who may or may not have shared the information that they were actually fake. So these are out there in people's collections. Some people know they're fake, some people don't. So how do we know that they are actually fake? Among the 364 regulars, representing 21 different cap and stem color combinations and 12 different ad regulars, all of them have exactly the same characteristics. They all have a metal hinge pin. They all have a tall thumb tab. They all have a dimple on the thumb tab on the side. And I'll be showing pictures of these different characteristics so that you can identify them as well. In every case, the cap is misaligned to the stem from the center line and misaligned on the back side of the cap where it matches up to the sleeve. The regulars all have a no shadow patent side and a shadowed PEZ only side, which is an unusual combination. Normally what we see is the reverse. The shadow is on the patent side and the no shadow is on the PEZ only side, as typically seen in many of the die cuts such as Snow White, Dopey, which all do have a shadow, no shadow combination, but it's normally reversed. The no shadow side lacks a beveling, which is normally seen in the V between the candy bricks that curve around the P. And this is the characteristic that we will get to, and I will show you. That's the one thing that you can look at and be very definitive that this is one of the fakes from this group. Every ad regular has a variation of some sort in the printing that is not typically seen in a legitimate dispenser. And all of these things, the fact that every single one of the 364 shares these same characteristics, we concluded that these were reproduced from the same molds and that they were printed as replicas. We're going to compare some of the legitimate dispensers to the fake dispensers, and in these pictures the legitimate dispenser is shown on the top, the fake is shown on the bottom. This is an example of the printing. The fakes or reproduced, however you want to call them, dispensers have a much crisper, more perfect looking print. While that's very nice, it doesn't make it more mint. It's just that the process used to print the dispensers in the 90s was much better than the process that was available for printing them in the 1960s. In the 1960s, these were hot stamped or silk screened. According to David Welch's interview with Curtilina, this was done in the office by some gal in the office. And you can see that the printing just is not as clear and crisp and even and equal in legitimate dispensers as what we see in these fake dispensers. This is the Royal Toffee dispenser. Again, the writing or the printing is much more crisp and much more clear in the reproduction or the fake than what it is in the original. But if you don't have an original in hand, it's going to be very difficult to tell from this characteristic. It's a good first start that you might notice at first glance, but it's not going to be a definitive characteristic unless you have a legitimate dispenser in hand to compare to. Again, it's very, very difficult to distinguish. The printing on this looks fairly similar. Certainly it looks different, but that's going to, again, if you don't have one in hand. But there's something beyond the printing in this particular dispenser. You will notice in the Indian chief's headdress, let me use the pointer, in this area. Oh, a red dot is not a good choice. This area. Let's erase that. Try again. These bricks. Notice how they're much more blocky than what we see here, where they are much more angled. Again, unless you remember, should it be blocky or should it be angled, that's going to be kind of tough to tell or tough to remember. So we'll be looking at different characteristics that you'll be able to use to distinguish. This is the witch regular, and boy, if you don't have a legitimate one and know exactly what you're looking for, this one is going to be very, very hard to tell. Additionally, this was done with a silk screening process, and so each one's going to be just a little bit different, so it's going to be much harder to tell. But don't despair, because there's more information and other characteristics you can use to identify. This is the PEZ Refreshes. Again, it's very difficult unless you have a legitimate dispenser side by side to compare to know which is or what the characteristics of the fake are. In this case, we can see certain differences. Looking at the R, in the center of that R where it meets up, you can tell there's a difference, but are you really going to remember? Should it be a skinny R or a fat R? How are you going to be able to know? How are you going to be able to tell? Well, we've got other characteristics that we're going to look at instead of those, such as the dimple that we see here on the cap. It's absent here. This is the tall thumb tab. This is a short thumb tab. The other characteristic we're going to look at on the cap that you can see here is the way it aligns with the back of the cap to the sleeve. there's a gap. You can see a section of sleeve through here on the fakes that is not present on a legitimate dispenser. We're going to explore those characteristics in the next slides. So here we're going to start looking at some of the characteristics that are shared by all of these, beginning with the cap. We talked about the cap not lining up properly, and we talked about the dimple. The dimple can be seen on each of these dispensers, right there, right there, right there, here, whoops, and here. Okay, that's a characteristic that is present on all of these dispensers, on all of the caps. Additionally, not lining up with the back of the cap to the edge of the sleeve, which leaves part of the sleeve showing. On each of these. And here it's a lot easier to see because of the difference in color. Here you can certainly see it on the black to the white, and again the red to the white is easily seen. That's present on all of these. This is the front view, and the cap is skewed along the center seam. You can see this seam does not line up with that seam. And that's a characteristic that you might actually see in a legitimate dispenser if things aren't real tight, but in every single one of these we see that characteristic, and that's rather unusual. There's 4 different cap styles that can be found on legitimate dispensers: tall thumb tab with metal hinge pin, short thumb tab with metal, tall thumb tab, plastic hinge, short thumb tab, and a plastic hinge. All 4 of those are perfectly legitimate. In the case of these fakes, they all have tall thumb tabs and metal pins. There is no variation that we normally would see among different ad regulars or among different regulars. That's probably because they were all made from the same mold. So in this case, we're showing the difference between the tall and the short thumb tab in the photo. So you can tell based on the height difference, this is the short thumb tab, this is the tall thumb tab. Notice the height. In this particular picture, one of these is fake and one of them is legitimate. What are a couple of characteristics that you would use to identify, since a tall thumb tab or a short thumb tab is perfectly legitimate? Well, again, we will look at the dimple here, and we will look at the misalignment of the back of the cap with the sleeve, and that's pretty good indication that this is the fake. Some ad regulars are known to come with short thumb tabs only, or with plastic hinge pins, and never come with a metal hinge pin. For example, the Royal Toffee, the Sports Chief, and 7 PEZ Daily legitimate dispensers will have a short thumb tab with a metal pin. PEZ Mock Fro is known to come with either a metal pin or a plastic hinge pin. So just because it has a metal hinge pin doesn't mean that it's automatically fake. It just means that we need to look at some of the other characteristics as well. But in the case of all of the fakes, rather than there being a mixture like we would expect for PEZ Mock Fro, in the case of the fakes, all of them in the batch came with a metal pin and a tall thumb tab. So these are the examples of real and fake side by side. Unfortunately, which is real and which is fake is, the order is reversed in several of these. So I've labeled that on the top, but I'm going to guess that you would be able to identify, based on some of the things that we've already talked about, which one is legit, which one is fake, by looking at the dimple, tall thumb tab, short thumb tab. Here it's harder to see just because of the picture. Looking for the dimples, you can kind of see the dimple on the 7 PEZ Daily. But the legitimate dispensers for these three should have a short thumb tab with the metal pin, and all of these have tall thumb tabs with the metal pins. And this is the Mock Fro, which here is an example of a metal hinge pin and a plastic hinge pin. In this case, this one is fake. It's part of the same batch. The writing is different. The dimple is there. You can see easily in this picture how the cap does not line up on the back. But in the case of the Mock Fro, it is known to come legitimately as a metal hinge pin with a tall thumb tab. So looking at the alignment on the back side is very critical here. In the case of the fake regulars, all of them have a no shadow on the PEZ patent side and a shadow on the PEZ only side. Hopefully you know what the difference, or what shadow and no means. Shadowing is there's the candy bricks on the top, and then there's shadowing, like many of them are stacked together or something, that you can see around the edges of the lettering. That's called shadow. No shadow, and it's hard to see in this picture, but there is nothing beyond just the block letters themselves. What's unusual here, and legitimately shadow, no shadow stems exist. Snow White and other PEZ from that time period, they have shadow, no shadow stems. The trick is they're reversed. Legitimate dispensers normally will have the shadow side on the patent side, and the no shadow is on the side that has just the PEZ lettering. We have not seen this combination. I haven't been able to find this combination on any legitimate dispenser anywhere. This is the only time I've seen this shadow, no shadow combination. It's not that the combination doesn't exist, it's just that it's reversed on all of these regulars. Now here's the real kicker. Here's the thing that you can look for, and this is the first thing I look for when someone hands me a dispenser and says, is this one of the fake regulars or fake ad regulars? This is the first thing I look for. This is the no shadow, and on a real dispenser you will see just a hint of beveling right here in the tip of the V, and it's much easier to see here and here, but yet on the fakes it is cut straight down, end of story, no beveling whatsoever. It is, 90-degree angle between the side and the top. There is no beveling. If I don't see beveling there, I'm going to say, nope, that's a fake. In addition, because stems can get swapped around too. But I have never seen this no shadow with no beveling. Never seen it to exist anywhere. This characteristic is present on all of the dispensers, because even the ad regulars, the writing is on one side of the stem, the other side of the stem is a no shadow, and all of them will have this characteristic. So you can easily tell a legitimate or not legitimate mock fro. Look at the beveling between the P, or in the V on the P. That is a characteristic that will help you identify among all 364 except the witch regulars, because it's a blank on both sides and has a witch on both sides. And that one is just going to be tough. So in that case, I think I would take a look at what else the dealer is selling. If you find that they're selling some fake ad regulars that you can identify by looking at the V area of the P, if they're selling a bunch of those and they have a witch regular to go along with it, I'd walk away. So hopefully this is the information that you need in order to identify what's a fake ad regular and what are legitimate ad regulars. Additionally, be careful who you're dealing with. Unfortunately, these have gotten into the hands of collectors who may not know the difference. And they're not trying to rip you off. They just don't realize that the dispenser they paid a lot of money for to have in their collection is in fact one of these fakes. Sadly, they're out there, they're among us, and more power to you if you want to collect them and have them in your collection, whether as examples or because you think it would be cool to own a fake. That's fine, that's your choice, as long as you go into it knowing the difference. Hope this has helped. Have a great day. Bye.